Life is not about how much we can get out of the universe. It is really about how much we have been able to give back to the universe. There are many ways in which you can give back. But there is one way by which the most intelligent give back. It's through innovation. Innovations are needed to solve the most challenging problems that we face. Challenges in the areas of sustainability, technology, education, energy, life sciences. Express your intelligence by solving some of the big challenges we face, and you will become innovation.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your lunch. Our next speaker really needs no introduction in Houston. She holds the dual titles of Chancellor of the University of Houston System and President of University of Houston. During her tenure, U of H has experienced a steady transition into a Tier 1 university, record-breaking research funding, enrollments, and recognition as an exceptional workplace. Please join me in welcoming Houston's Dr. Renu Khator to the stage.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And to those of you who are coming from outside of Houston, a very, very warm welcome to Houston. I am really humbled to be here today because I know I am in the company of IIT graduates. You're the best and the brightest. Congratulations to you. My hat's off to you. I know I didn't have credentials to get to an IIT. But I had better credentials to find my way to marry one. Now, I can vouch for the value of IIT graduates, both outside and inside the house. Because of that reason, I'm very proud of the intelligence that you all bring here to the table. Conference theme is about inspiring innovation. And whenever you talk about innovation, you cannot have a discourse without bringing in education in the mix. Education and also higher education in particular. However, higher education itself is going through a remarkable transformation. The pundits are predicting that over next 7 to 10 years, just the span of 7 to 10 years, 1/3 of the institutions of higher education in the United States of America will not find themselves viable to continue functioning. The structure will change, the delivery will change. It is possible that how we organize and certify knowledge may change too. However, I know that you have panels on higher education later on, and they will talk about this. So I'm not touching upon that issue today. I have been asked by the organizers to present a case study to you about the University of Houston and its innovation and its transformation through innovation. So I'm very happy to do that today because I can talk about University of Houston in my sleep for hours together. I know there are lots of cougars here in the room as well, so you can vouch for it. There we go. Now, 6 years, I'm going to give you a little bit about the 6 years because I'm just been completing my 6 years as Chancellor and President of this University of Houston, a major research university in the 4th largest city in the United States of America. In 6 years, I have held one and simple belief, and the belief has been that great universities are built by great communities, and communities are enriched by universities. In other words, there is a linkage between universities and communities that simply cannot be separated. So we invited the community, our region, our city, to be part of the transformation of the University of Houston 6 years ago. And the city responded, and they responded very well. Now, if we have had transformation, which I'll give you some statistics so you can believe it, it has been simply because we really partnered, and we partnered with the strengths of our city and our region. So we built a very strong partnership with the energy industry, and as you heard from previous speakers, that Houston does have a very big footprint. Actually, it is the oil and gas capital of the world. We built a very strong partnership with the energy industry. In 6 years, we also built a very strong partnership with the healthcare industry because, again, Houston is home to the world's largest medical facility. And we also focused on meeting the needs of the community and being relevant to the community by preparing the workforce and by providing the intellectual capital. And we chose to do this not by rhetoric, not by talking, but walking the talk and holding ourselves accountable. We have full accountability, one-page sheet, what we call a report card or progress card. You can find it on our website. Therefore, we know if we are making progress, if we are being relevant to the community, if we are serving our community to the best potential possible. The result of all of this has been that there used to be a warehouse that sat right next to the University of Houston. Today, that warehouse has been transformed into a very thriving energy research park. If you're going to have an energy capital of the world, you of course need to produce workforce, but you need to think about the future of energy. How can you bring together public sector, private sector, academic sector, everybody together to be thinking about the issues that are coming in front of us and that must be resolved? That facility, which is 75 acres, 500,000 square feet of area, has been now converted into a research space, into a space where technology is not just being discovered, but also being marketed. Today, we have lots of research centers there. We have petroleum engineering program there. We have other programs there, but we also have something that has never happened at the University of Houston before, that we have 5 startup companies there. 2 of those companies are by students. And this result is only in last 4 years. So you can imagine now that it is kicking and growing very well, what will happen over next 5 years. We have started a trend that simply is going to gain momentum. Now, our curriculum also has changed as a result of partnering with the community. The examples I can give you is, one example in the energy industry is about a program called subsea engineering. We know that offshore drilling is the future in oil and gas. And we built a program because industry said that those are the training skills that they will need, and they need today and they will need in future. So we built a program that doesn't exist anywhere in the United States of America. It's the first one of its kind, and there are only 4 other in the entire world. And we started as a pilot program, and today that program is growing out of bound. We can't even fill the demand that we have for it today. The second example I'll give you is in the medical area. We do not have a medical school, but Houston has 3 medical schools. You can see glass as half full, or you can see glass as half empty. We saw glass as half full. We built partnerships with those 3 medical schools, and today we have direct admission process that goes out of high school. We recruit students who are jointly interviewed by the University of Houston and by the medical school faculty. They are given direct admission to the medical school. They finish, instead of 8 years, in 7 years, they finish their BS and then transfer to MD, and they finish their BS MD in 7 years. We do. And we are doing the same thing in nursing and the same thing in public health. As a matter of fact, 25% of nursing seats are reserved for students who are coming through the University of Houston pipeline. Now, another example of the transformation is that we have brought many members of the National Academy of Engineering and National Academy of Science, the very prized faculty, Now, the last member, before I came to the University of Houston, the last member of the academy brought in here was in 1984. There was a complete drought between 1984 and 2008. Since 2008, we have brought in one or two every year. And as a result now, we have the threshold of intellectual capital that is creating a different kind of dynamism inside the university about research. We have also taken the lead in terms of commercialization of technology. When professors invent something, it's great. They publish, it's even wonderful. But then their technology sits on the shelf, and if it is not used immediately in the market, then it really is not benefiting the society. We decided to get very aggressive about it. And I won't go into the details, but one way of looking at it is when the technology gets marketed, there is a revenue that comes from your intellectual property on that technology. Just to give you an example, in 2007, the year before I came here, our IP revenue was $600,000 a year. This year, we are finishing the same IP revenue at about $17 million. We are the number one university, public university in the whole nation that does not have a medical school and that has the IP revenue of this level. We are ranked number one right now. Another example, we are no longer considered a commuter campus. That's the name that was given to us. Today, in last 5 years, 6 years, if you have not been to the University of Houston, I challenge you to come. And I challenge you to find your way to whatever building you were when you were on campus, because I guarantee you, you will not find your way, because I can't find my way around. We have finished $1 billion worth of construction program, but we have built residence halls, and now we are the second most residential campus in the state of Texas. All public and private universities. The only university that has more beds on campus than University of Houston is Texas A&M. And I won't go there as to where they're located, so it makes sense. Now, we live in a thriving place of 6 million people right here in Houston. We do not necessarily need programs where students never have to come on campus. Online learning is very important, but at the same time, on-site interaction with the students is equally important. So even though we haven't built very many complete online programs, but 25% of our students are taking an online course to fulfill their requirements at any given time. So we're giving convenience, and at the same time, we are venturing into the area which is the wave of the future. And finally, I'll give you another example, and that is the entrepreneurship, because you are IIT graduates. I know most of you are very entrepreneurial. You are serial entrepreneurs, as a matter of fact. We have an entrepreneurship program at the undergraduate level that is ranked number one in the nation. Last 3 of the 5 years, it is ranked number one in the nation. So that tells you, when we take things seriously, we truly do take things seriously. Our aim has been, through all of this exercise, our aim has been one and the simple one. We will bring innovation, we'll bring transformation, but our aim remains non-negotiable. And our aim has been developing leaders of tomorrow who can think critically, who can lead globally, and who can function in a diverse, international, multicultural environment. And students, leaders who can enhance the quality of life, not just economically, but also socially. We make this goal as a non-negotiable goal, and that means whatever it takes to get to the goal, we are going to accomplish that. Everything else is negotiable. The strategies are negotiable, the resources are negotiable, how many hours we work in a day are negotiable. Nonetheless, the goals themselves are not negotiable. Now, I know I'm very, very inspired by your presence here, because you symbolize what success is. As I said, you're the best and the brightest from India. You're the best and the brightest of performance right here in the United States. You have proven that anything is possible and everything is possible. And I know many of you are involved and engaged in building, in supporting world-class institutions, either back in India, IITs, or here in the United States, maybe your other alma mater where you did your PhD or your master's or whatever. So I'd like to leave you with just a couple of points which I think really are important for building world-class universities. My number one message is that for world-class institutions, there is absolutely no compromise on excellence. And if an institution does not have the courage to call what is mediocre as mediocre and what is excellent as excellent, it is not going to be a world-class institution. Very many times, institutions are mediocre in areas, but they couch it, cover it, and call it themselves excellent. And I would say that we cannot settle with mediocrity if we are building a world-class university. My second message, yes, I think that's worth a clap for sure, because it is the hardest transformation to bring, and it is definitely not an easy task, and I know there are several people here from the University of Houston who can vouch for it, what kind of a hard lifting it is to really separate the mediocrity from excellence. I do have here in attendance Dr. Ramanan Krishnamurthy, who is a graduate of IIT Madras, and he's leading our energy initiative. And as I told you, my husband is IIT, and there are many other IITs here as well. My second message here is that universities cannot build themselves by themselves. They just cannot. Universities cannot stay within their own boundaries. Universities always were considered to be there for the help of the community. We have to step out if we haven't stepped out, but we have to build partnerships. What is extremely important is the public mission of higher education. However, it must be combined with the private interest and investment. The best of the universities, private universities in this country, receive millions of dollars of federal public money, whether they receive it from the National Science Foundation or National Institute of Health or other agencies. Their research portfolios are full of public money. So there is a public-private partnership that way. All of the best public institutions in this country receive millions of dollars in terms of the private support. For the University of Houston, we receive about $115 to $120 million a year in terms of private support to really fulfill our public mission. In India, it is a particular challenge because that culture is yet to come, where the private individuals, the private sector, the private enterprises are seriously supporting the public education. The trend seems to be to establish private universities, leave the public universities here. And I know IITs are great institutions with public support, but they will need private support to really build themselves as world-class institutions. The third message I will leave here is, no matter what you say, at the end of the day, universities are defined by students, when they are there as students and when they graduate from there. Because if we did not have students at a university, we cannot call ourselves a university. We can call ourselves a research center, an institute, anything we want. But we are a university. We are a place of learning. We are a place of higher education simply because we have students who are there to learn. Therefore, we have to focus. We have to commit and dedicate ourselves to students. Because when they graduate, they still continue to serve the institution. They define an institution, they shape an institution, and they are the reason why institutions are called excellent. Today, IITs are known and called as greatest institutions in the world. I know that it is harder to get in IIT than it might be to get into any institution in the world. They are great not because the institutions, they are great because of you. You who have graduated from there, you who have brought that experience, and you who have succeeded using that name and that experience. So I commend you. I challenge you to continue to look back to your alma mater, to making it even a better place than what it was when you were there. But you are defining that institution, you are defining excellence, and I'm not an expert on language, but if I can leave you with one note, I think if you want to spell excellence, just spell it with 3 letters, IIT. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khator. On behalf of IIT 2013 conference, please accept our token of appreciation. Let's give her another round of applause. So just a quick programming note, our next session will have a Q&A ability. If you've downloaded the mobile app, you'll be able to submit questions to our next speaker. Want to make sure if you're seeing a warning triangle for some reason on the app, go ahead and click the update to get the latest schedule, and that should be able to resolve the issue. So moving on, we all know Houston is the energy capital of the world. No welcome speech in Houston is complete without recognizing the role that energy plays in Houston. Our next speaker is Andrew Gould. Mr. Gould is the chairman of BG Group, a leading global energy company in the natural gas space with over 6,000 employees. He was previously the chairman and CEO of Schlumberger from 2003 to 2011. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Gould to the stage.
Thank you. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I'd like firstly to thank the organizers for their kind invitation to speak. I was going to start off with some statistics about IIT, the system, but after your Consul General's remarks, I think I'll avoid most of them. What I will say is that according to Wikipedia, not the Indian government, there have currently been, since the start, 170,000 alumni from the IIT system. And as I was told before I started that there are almost 1,700 here, that means that 1% of all the alumni who've ever come through IIT are attending this conference. So, I'm sure that Sunil is going to be disappointed. But when he asked me to speak, he gave me a steer towards what have been the key innovations in the oil and gas industry, and that I should spend time on what might be needed in the future and how we might get there. But thinking about the subject, it seemed to me that I could not address it without looking at the structure of the industry, how it's evolved, and how the role of the different players has changed. The oil and gas industry is intimately linked with geopolitics for two reasons. Firstly, because oil as a source of energy remains unrivaled in its efficiency, transportability, and effectiveness in a modern economy. And control of this source of energy bestows great power. The second is that throughout the history of the oil industry, nations have struggled to take control of their own resources, but that this has often been in contradiction with access to the best available technology and practice to exploit the resource. As we move into the second century of the exploitation of hydrocarbons, the easy oil is gone, and we're exploiting more and more difficult and remote sources of hydrocarbon. The costs are rising, and the technology used, as well as the project management, is becoming increasingly complex. One brokerage house recently estimated that the capital and operating expenditure acquired in 2013 is $979 billion, up from $588 billion in 2007, and $234 billion in 2003. And these spectacular increases are the result of the world's demand and the lack of investment that occurred following the oil price collapse in 1986 until the turn of the century. Obviously, such a massive increase in activity puts a huge strain on the network of operators and contractors, and there are two principal causes of this stress. The first is the sheer number of large projects that are being executed concurrently. Schlumberger's business consulting group has reported that within the global upstream in 2013, there were 17 mega projects underway, mega being defined as having a budget of more than $2 billion in 2011 dollars, and this compares to 2 in the year 2000. That there were 37 companies with a capital expenditure budget in excess of $5 billion compared to 7 in the year 2000. That the industry's capability to deliver large-scale projects is not keeping pace is evident. For example, mega projects today are delayed on average 1.5 to 2 years. and the number of those with very severe delays, i.e. more than 2 years, is increasing every day. This rate of failure compares unfavorably to the average of all other industries, and even more so to the non-exploration and production industries. The second major reason for concern is the demographics of the oil and gas industry. The same failure to invest in the 1990s translated into a failure to recruit into the industry, with the result that today, the age group which should be approaching 20 years of experience is very small, and that the generation that began their careers in the post-1970s oil shocks is about to retire. Schlumberger Business Consulting has also built a model that relates the efficiency of individual companies to the intensity of their petrotechnical professional staff. Using this model with estimates of activity growth, recruitment, and retirement, they consider that in 2016, the industry will be short of 15,300 professionals, or 20% of the current total petrotechnical workforce. This massive ramp-up, plagued with capacity and human resource issues, has to be considered in the context of some fundamental industry changes. We have more diverse players using increasingly complex technology, often in increasingly challenging geography, and the industry structure will have to adapt to cope with this. In an earlier age, when hydrocarbons were relatively accessible and plentiful, this was less important, or to express it otherwise, a lot of mistakes could be made without affecting the final result. And this is no longer true. But I have to begin by describing perhaps the biggest shift in the industry, which is the rise of the national oil companies over the last 70 years. It all began in Mexico in 1938, when the foreign oil companies were expelled and the right to own and produce hydrocarbons became that of the state. A few days afterwards, a director of Shell said a precedent is established within the world, particularly in Latin America, which would jeopardize the whole structure of international trade and security of foreign investment. To many of us in the oil and gas industry, that sounds eerily familiar. Of course, Russia had closed before then, but this was internal politics more than the expulsion of foreign interests. Next to go was the Anglo-Iranian, a forerunner of BP in 1951, and this represented the end of the first and largest of the Middle East concessions. I don't have to take you through the subsequent development of OPEC, the dismantling of the post-war Middle East concessions, and the growth of the national oil companies in the aftermath of the oil price shocks of the 1970s, and the further closing that occurred during the decade following the millennium. It's now estimated that 75% of the world's conventional oil and gas is in control of state companies and off limits to private international capital, with the consequence that private industry has been pushed to the frontiers in ever more difficult plays, such as ultra-deep water, or has sought to make economic poorer and poorer sources of hydrocarbon, such as shale gas or coal seam methane. The question becomes, how did the national oil companies meet their need for technology? And the answer, of course, is in many diverse ways. Those who remained totally closed to the outside world either fell seriously behind or existed in a time warp where whole bodies of technologies that were currently used internationally just did not exist. Perhaps the most flagrant example of this was in Russia, where hydraulic fracturing was virtually unknown until the country opened up in the early 2000s, where it had an immediate and dramatic effect on the levels of production in existing fields. Horizontal drilling was then employed to similar effect. Russian reservoir development was governed by rigid manuals explaining necessary grid patterns to be employed while drilling up a field, with no consideration of nature's heterogeneities. At the same time, Russian science in certain fields was unrivaled, and much fit-for-purpose technology was produced, well adapted to the fields of Western Siberia. Other companies followed an erratic course often dictated by the degree of political control that was exercised over the company. PDVSA in Venezuela is a classic example. It began with a highly trained body of Venezuelan engineers who came out of the foreign partners who had left the country. Its skills and research capability were formidable, and in the last 20 years of the last century, the company was a technical force to be reckoned with. However, as politics played a greater and greater role in the management of the company, this strength was gradually, then brutally removed. Other companies had a similar heritage of trained nationals who initially were able to take on the role of the foreign partners, but who subsequently failed to maintaining the training effort necessary. There are, of course, a group of national oil companies who responded fully to the challenge. They have in common a more arm's-length relationship with their governments and an understanding of the complexities of the technology and geoscience necessary to succeed in the oil and gas business. Two of them, Petrobras and Statoil, have been pioneers in deep-water harsh environments. Saudi Aramco has become a leader in reservoir management, while Petronas in Malaysia has built an enviable oil and gas portfolio outside its home country. Statoil in particular, but others as well, have been investors in research and development, often directly in products and services relevant to their home market. Petrobras has pioneered much technology in deep water and has built an offshore industry with virtually no help from international partners. Saudi Aramco has training schemes which are state-of-the-art. Its technical personnel have almost without exception obtained first degrees or advanced degrees in the United States or Europe. There is a real commitment to excellence in everything they do, and technology is fundamental to their ambitious recovery factors from their supergiant fields. There remains one big actor in the area of technology and technology support to the industry, and that is the service arm. Prior to the oil shocks of the 1970s, many oil companies, besides exploiting their assets, also developed and deployed what would be thought of today as service company technology. They maintained their own service divisions and owned their own service equipment. This was particularly true outside North and South America, as the service industry had an immature geographical presence in the Eastern Hemisphere. As a result of the sustained explosion in exploration and production activity following the oil price shocks of the 1970s, the service industry began to invest in a rapid worldwide expansion. Growth from 1973 to 1984 was phenomenal, and by the end of the period, the service industry found itself with many new players, a deeper understanding of technology, and the wherewithal to deploy it worldwide. The age of oil companies having their own service operations was fast diminishing. Service companies began spending extensively on research and development to improve their relative competitive position, and operators substantially reduced their service arms. Then the oil price collapsed, and for the following decade, activity fell. The world steadily absorbed the excess production capacity established in the 1980s. Prices remained depressed, and everyone began scrutinizing budgets. Research and development became more focused on reducing finding and development cost, and operators recognized duplication between their own efforts and those of service companies. Operators closed whole departments and even whole laboratories. They also sold off the last of their service assets, mostly offshore rigs that they had built a decade earlier to ensure they had supply. The trend has continued, with R&D spending by major international oil companies, which, although it is increasing rapidly, is not matching the overall rate of increase in the service industry. Today, the large players in the service industry provide more than 1/4 of the total spend. The period of low oil prices also led to massive consolidation in the service sector, where the three major service companies expanded from small enterprises specializing in particular technologies to global organizations offering a wide spectrum of services and products. Backed by strong research and development and considerable training resources, their range of competencies increased. They have at times been pushed in this direction by the operators themselves, who look for greater integration at the level of suppliers to reduce costs. It's also true that the growth of the national oil companies provided a whole new type of client for the service industry to sell to. Clients who are anxious to learn and who wish to access the research and development expertise of the service industry. The absence of the international partners was to some extent replaced by the international service industry. In some cases, particularly in Mexico, the lack of capacity in the national oil company was replaced by subcontracting whole projects to service companies. At the same time, the service industry's increased technical scope was enabling other players. This is particularly evident in the way exploration is being done today. Seismic and technical software tools are available from the service industry, where before this technology was largely the preserve of the major oil companies. As a result, geologists with a good idea can raise capital and rent or buy the technology necessary to mature it. The same is true of independent oil companies. The advances in horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing have been advances made largely by the service industry that have also been instrumental in driving the efficiency gains in the production of shale gas and shale oil. To recap, we now have a highly fragmented operator world where increasingly national oil companies dominate conventional oil and gas, while the private universe has specialized in what remains. It has meant that projects have got larger and more complex. Gas projects, particularly liquefied natural gas or LNG, have added an additional dimension of complexity, as recent experience in Australia has shown. In an overheated market, with a major shortage of expertise looming, what can be done? If we look at other industries, notably the automotive and aerospace industries, we seem to have been following a remarkably similar pattern. We are at a fact in the point which was reached by the auto industry in the late 1970s or early 1980s. The service industry is not about to supplant the oil companies in any way, shape, or form, but it's getting close to the point where the relationship between the two is likely to change dramatically. In the automotive industry between 1986 and 2003, the number of suppliers was divided by 6 from 30,000 to 5,000, while at the same time the size of the supplier market was multiplied by 3 from 250 billion to 800 billion. The growth in the supplier market came as manufacturers increasingly outsourced equipment and tasks they had previously performed in-house. Suppliers became increasingly competitive as they increased their research and development spend and implemented lean manufacturing techniques. This trend is in no small part responsible for the increased functionality and reduced cost of the modern automobile. Suppliers have become increasingly innovative to the point where much of their technology is provided to automobile manufacturers as a black box. I'm thinking of devices as commonplace as an ABS braking system, where the exact knowledge of how the system works remains with the supplier and not the car manufacturer. This is not dissimilar to our own industry, where proprietary algorithms for geological steering, for example, are sold without divulging the modeling code to customers. A similar evolution took place in the aerospace industry. I chose the Dreamliner, which was a bit of a mistake. Where the airframe manufacturer's traditional client base has eroded, but the advent of the highly successful budget carriers, coupled with the rapid growth of airlines in the Middle East and Asia, and an overall reduction in military budgets, has increased pressure on them to engineer lower-cost product. They are increasingly pressuring their suppliers to consolidate in order to provide incentives for efficiency, improved cycle times, and lower cost of ownership. In the electronics industry, the engagement of the supplier base in product design has been a feature of the industry since its inception. In fact, a number of general trends can be derived from other industries that are restructured around strong suppliers. Such a movement normally results in an increased size of the supplier market, the early involvement of suppliers in design, more risk sharing between system integrator and OEM, and finally, more joint research and development. Are these lessons transferable to the upstream oil and gas sector? To some extent, this has already occurred, with the migration of some of the research and development spend and the subsequent specialization being indications. There are also a number of trends in the world of exploration production which are very notable. Firstly, the willingness to exploit the research and development capability of the service industry is something that is much more advanced in the national oil companies than it is in the international oil companies. With national oil companies, and the ambition and quality of the projects that are being undertaken is remarkable. They have tailored projects to solve problems in their own environments and have given rise to substantial commercial services for the service industry. Secondly, it's no longer sufficient to develop projects at laboratories located in traditional areas of research and development in the OECD countries. There is a real desire to expand the host nation's technical capacity, and we've seen the gradual buildup of a network of research and development centers in countries around the world. These can be full-scale research operations, or they can be technology centers concentrating on specific local problems. Increasing this model of distributed research is growing with the added advantages that today's communications mean that networking such centers is increasingly adding to their global productivity. It has been highly sought after by the national oil companies, the two most remarkable being perhaps Saudi Aramco and Petrobras. It's also instructive to look at some of the ways that technology has been developed in the North Sea, where a conscious research and development policy from the Norwegian government, in conjunction with Statoil, has created several new market leaders. Norway now dominates the marine seismic business worldwide and has taken this market from US contractors. They have created several offshore drilling contractors. They dominate several aspects of exploration and production software, and they are at the forefront of subsea processing. Thirdly, there is a remarkable increase in the outsourcing of parts of the exploration and production process to the supplier base. In midstream, construction companies assume responsibilities far beyond that of a traditional supplier. The advent of a market for speculative seismic data is another sign. Considerable numbers of wells are drilled on a subcontract basis by the service industry, notably in Mexico and Iraq. There is a growing market in the outsourcing of mature production. However, here again, there are differences in the approach of IOCs and NOCs. In general, the international oil companies tend not want to expand the role of the service industry, as they fear that encouraging increased capability in the service industry will further reduce their chances of access with host governments, or will enable the independent oil companies. At the same time, the national oil companies see subcontracted processes in several different ways. The first and simplest is they see it as a way to add capability to increase their overall activity. The service in contracts in Mexico are the best examples of this. Others see it as a way to accelerate local learning curves, with an extremely important aspect of this being the willingness to incorporate and encourage nascent local industry in the offering. Creating local employment is a key demand in many countries, particularly in the Middle East. In addition, there are countries who adopt the outsourced process model as a way to accelerate their access to the technology learning curve. For them, observation of the work process, training of their personnel, and learning new methods are an extremely important part of the decision to outsource. The rise of the national oil companies has also led to one final trend for the service industry: an extraordinary thirst for education and training needed to create a large enough body of skilled exploration and production professionals. While training has always been supplied by the service industry to a certain extent, the scale on which it is now being asked to participate is unlike anything we've seen before. All host governments and national oil companies are acutely aware of the talent shortage. It is probable that our industry, given its geographic spread, infrastructure requirements, increased competitiveness, and the need for vastly improved cycle times, is seeing or will see a similar evolution to that experienced in aerospace. Tier 1 suppliers will emerge who can accept responsibility and risk sharing for the more comprehensive tasks that are transferred to them. They will assume the responsibility for integrating a vast network of smaller suppliers and innovators that will continue to provide a highly competitive environment. Integration of local industry, creation of local employment, and the transfer of knowledge will be critical to success. It is likely that these changes will be brought about by both the international oil companies and the national oil companies. I would point out that at this critical junction in our industry's history, despite high commodity prices, the return on capital of the major oil companies has declined by about 1/3 in the last 8 years. As a result, shareholders are calling for reduced capital budgets, better economics, higher free cash flow, and a higher return on capital. Today's limited ability to increase supply, either through lack of resources and equipment or through the reluctance to invest, is not in our long-term interests. Again, if the experience of other industries is any guide, companies will see dramatic reductions in cost. Such evolution will continue to level the playing field across the customer spectrum for the service industry, but the complexity of the tasks being undertaken will ensure the role of the very large integrated oil companies remains differentiated. No supplier has the experience, knowledge, or appetite for risk to tackle the high-cost, high-risk projects of today, any more than suppliers could have replaced Airbus or Boeing in the conception of their new aircraft. At the same time, we need to remind ourselves that other differences remain between oil companies and service companies. The financial profile of the oil companies remains fundamentally different. Oil companies have been traditionally valued on their exposure to the ownership of oil as a proxy for exposure to the oil price and geological risk, or in the case of the national oil companies, their capacity to contribute to the nation's wealth. Even if the international oil companies are increasingly accepting contracts that reflect more of a service model than an equity model, it is likely that they will continue to be valued on the net present value of the quantity of the commodity they can find, produce, and sell. Service companies, on the other hand, are typically valued on the earnings power of their service portfolio applied to a probable activity scenario, and they are attributed to the oil company's desire to spend on exploration and production. Ladies and gentlemen, the risk profile and the appetite of the oil companies and service companies remains fundamentally different, and most oil companies typically cover more of the exploration and production value chain than any service company. The service companies remain suppliers of products and services to the oil companies, whatever their form, national, international, small or large, oil or gas. What is clear is that if the industry wants to progress in the quality of its project execution, new ways of working together to better exploit the strengths of all are essential. It will not be easy, as it goes against the traditional relationships within the industry and does not fit well with the notions of partnership and the public laws works of many countries. But the performance of the industry and rising costs make such cooperation essential. I have not answered Sunil's original question, but today, more than any discrete technology or family of technologies, an improvement in project execution is what the industry needs. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention. They can ask questions?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Gould, we have some questions here now that we're going to populate that the audience has selected, so we'll go ahead and put those up on the screen,
Thank you.
and you can answer.
How will fracking change the oil and gas industry? I think it's important to distinguish between the fact that fracking is a technology that's existed since the 1940s, but what is new is that fracking is being used on a scale that's never been used before. And the three principal elements of fracking that are being attacked is firstly the risk of the chemicals that are used leaking into drinking water, methane emissions, and the possibility of fracking in itself creating a seismic event that might affect the surface. And I suppose as a professional of the industry, I'm extremely biased. But I think that most of those fears can actually be dispersed. So what I think is needed, and by the way, this is going to be particularly needed if fracking is ever going to be used outside the United States to the same scale, is for the industry to build proper disclosure metrics when it uses fracking, to do proactive preparation of local populations before they start to frack, and to report honestly on what they do to mitigate the three events that I just described. And I think if the industry does that, the benefits that fracking can bring in terms of bringing on new supplies of gas and tight oil are such that there will be acceptance. But I do think that the debate has gone so far, particularly in Europe, that it will never, ever be able to go at the same speed as it has done in the United States. So in conclusion, I think that shale gas and tight oil fracking is an indispensable technology for quite a long time to come. And it is good communication and economics that will make it come through. Another question? I think I prefer the old-fashioned way where people stood up and took microphones. This is the question I didn't want to answer. I think that... sorry? Well, which emerging technologies could be the next disruptive technology? It's one of those questions that you know your answer is going to be wrong before you start. So actually, I think that, you know, the likelihood of some absolutely silver bullet breakthrough technology in oil and gas today is quite unlikely. I think that the technologies that probably have the most road in front of them are technologies that are going to reduce the effort that goes into producing shale gas or shale oil. So up until now, fracking has been, shall I say, somewhat indiscriminate. When we can pinpoint fracks to where we know the maximum likelihood of gas production is going to come, and we can do that in a cost-effective way, it will actually do a lot to make a lot more of the shale gas reserves economic. And the other thing is that in the new sources of oil offshore, there is a huge cost benefit to being able to migrate the processing equipment from a floating platform to the ocean floor, which essentially is a problem of electricity distribution, which is why some of the non-oil and gas companies are extremely interested in this. But to the extent that we can do that, it will considerably reduce the cost of offshore development and probably help to improve the recovery factor in the long term. So that would make a big difference. And the next question is, in a post-Macondo world, can you comment on the impact of regulatory environments on development cost? I actually think that outside the Gulf of Mexico, the regulatory environment hasn't changed that much, but the industry actually has put in a great deal of self-discipline to ensure that it has the means to control a Macondo-type event very rapidly. And so far, the regulators have, I think, internationally very much accepted, they have examined and accepted that the industry has made the necessary effort. That doesn't mean that the industry can ever slacken off because should another Macondo event occur, then I think that we would be in for some very, very severe regulatory restrictions. Energy education in developing countries. Your thoughts on the role of energy education in developing countries. There is a fundamental difference between the Western world, or the OECD, and the developing world when it comes to energy education. You know, it is very difficult to go on campus in Europe or the United States and to assume, except in certain states, that energy education, particularly in oil and gas, is a popular course for students to follow. And the reasons for that are the belief that oil and gas is a dying industry, the belief that climate change is largely a result of burning hydrocarbons, and the attractiveness of some of the alternative energies that are being proposed. If you go to the developing world, it's completely different. People want to join the oil and gas industry. And actually, one of the things that is really different between the rise in the oil price in the last 10 years and what happened in the 1970s is almost every country in the Middle East is investing in energy education in a very large way, both in creating universities and in creating research. So I think that, you know, I've said this before and been very unpopular for it, that if we're not careful, we will lose, or the West will lose the leadership in energy technology because the people who want to study it are not in the West. And I think I'm going to have to end there. So let me thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that you have a very successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gould. On behalf of the IIT 2013 conference, we have a token of our appreciation we'd like to present to you now.
Thank you, Sanil.
Let's go ahead and give him another round of applause. So moving right along, we've had a great start, but to truly understand what the next 2 days will be all about, I would like to introduce the person leading the team that has designed the program that we will experience. Please join me in welcoming the program chair of the IIT 2013 Global Conference, Pradeep Anand, onto the stage. Welcome, Pradeep.
Hi there. Hey, it gives me great pleasure to be here today. And at the outset, I'd like to thank the leadership team of the IIT alumni of Greater Houston for giving me this opportunity to be of service to the community. I thank Viti Bindra and Pratish Kanani, the chairs of the conference, for enriching my life through this experience. When I was requested by them to chair the program content section, the theme for the conference was already defined. Inspiring innovation for tomorrow. You know what the acronym is, right? IIT. So I took a step back and wondered, what would tomorrow look like? After studying a few forecasts, I settled on one. By 2045, the world's population will be about 9 billion people. The founding fathers of the United States and India had instilled in me that each one of these 9 billion people have a right to pursuit of happiness and to education and a healthy life. The needs of these 9 billion people would also create a stress nexus. We will need 50% more food, 30% more water, and 50% more energy. So the question that we were faced with was, how do we get there from here? And the answer was, it didn't come all at one time, but it did evolve into, the answer was that we would get there by weaving steel threads into a tapestry of innovations to meet the challenges of the future. STEEL stands for sustainability, technology, education, energy, and life sciences. And threads because each one of these, S, T, E, E, and L, intermingle and intertwine to create these new solutions. So the program content has 5 threads, and each of them has a leader or two. And I'd like you to I would like these gentlemen to stand up when I mention their names. Sustainability is led by Dr. Puneet Agarwal, the one from IIT Kanpur, and Arun Rajamani, IITM. 2 sessions, they have 2 breakout sessions, one of them immediately after this, on food and water and the other on renewables. Technology innovation is led by Vivek Kishore, IIT Kanpur. At tomorrow morning's plenary session, Partha Ghosh will share his wisdom on avoiding the dangers of linear thinking for innovation without illusions. And we have 2 breakout sessions, one on the innovation process and the other on entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. Education is led by the inimitable Shail Kumar, IIT Kharagpur, 4 sessions in all. He's responsible for 25 speakers. There is a plenary session tomorrow morning. It's a brilliant one on massively open online courses. This is world-class stuff, guys. And 3 other during breakout sessions. Energy is led by my co-chair, who just presented Mr. Gould with his gift, our token of appreciation, Sunil Pangarkar, and assisted by Mohan Natarajan. A plenary session on fracking frenzy and how a technological and microeconomic force has changed the global macroeconomic balance. And then we have a breakout session about innovations in the oil industry. And finally, life sciences is led by Dr. Atul Vardachari. He has 2 plenary sessions and 2 breakout sessions. So that's the steel content of our program. We are the graduates of the Indian Institutes of Technology. So there will be a sprinkling of India and Indianness in our program. The Indianness comes in, first of all, with Miss America, Nina Davaluri, the next generation of Indo-Americans who has made it into a major global platform. The other components that we have is this afternoon, Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, Professor Amartya Sen will be speaking on rebuilding India, and the closing ceremony will be presented by our own Desh Deshpande, who will be talking about creating mega impact with social enterprises. That's the entire program content. We have a little over 90 speakers, and the amount of time that we have allocated to them is only 25 hours cumulatively. So on an average, each speaker is going to get about 14.16 minutes. You don't know how grateful I feel that every one of them agreed to be here and share their wisdom, and I'm sure the reason they decided to do that was because of the elite audience that they could influence, some of the brightest minds in the world. And I thank you for being here. However, before I leave, I have to say, recall something that Confucius once said. I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. At this conference, I hope you remember what you see and you experience. But then, after the conference is over, you go out there and practice some of the things that you have learned from this conference and perhaps build a much better world for our children and for tomorrow. Thank you.
Pradeep, thank you very much. Let's give him another round of applause for all his hard work. This conference has been quite an endeavor, and he really has done a fantastic job putting the program together. Our next session will start at 2 p.m. in the breakout rooms A, B, and C. We have a breakout on education, sustainability, and energy. The breakout rooms are located on this floor to your left, my right. We'll have a short break before the breakout sessions, and I'll see you all here back for the plenary talk with Nobel laureate Amartya Sen at 4 p.m. Thank you very much.